All right. Francisco, Daniel, if y'all are ready, I'm Jake. I'm going to go ahead and let's get started. Just so everyone's aware, we are recording this session today. We're going to be sharing it with you for those participants. So please know. So first off, thank all of you for joining us today. We're super excited to be sharing some very relevant content on how companies are utilizing an employer of record service in order to support their organizations and retaining their talent. There's a lot of content that'll be covered today, and we're looking forward to sharing our expertise and knowledge with you. Jake, if you can switch the slide, please. Thank you. So first off, I just want to welcome everybody. Thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedules and making time to be here with us today. I want to talk to you a little bit about global expansion. We're hosting this webinar today, and please look, because we're going to be doing more for you. But Global Expansion is a professional employment organization that specializes in employer of record services. We are the only privately held global employer of record company that is out in the market. We currently are supporting clients and employees in 214 different territories and countries. And I will tell you that we're solving some very critical issues for a lot of organizations from a small, mid, and even large size with different solutions that are helping them tap into some of these pain points within their organizations when it comes to their global talent. So Global Expansion is thankful to be here today, and we're thankful to be able to bring this information to you. Jake, if you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so we're going to do introductions so that you can see like these awesome people that have joined me today, even though I think you can only see me right now, which is okay. But my name is Meredith Morris, and I am the current Director of International Development with Global Expansion. I have been in the global mobility industry, I hate to say this, but a little over 25 years in different forms and fashion. I do carry my certified relocation professional and my global mobility specialist certifications from Worldwide ERC, and I also am SHRM CP certified. And then I'm sorry, I'm going to go ahead and do this, but I'm going to do a shameless plug. I am the current director for Texas SHRM, for our Texas SHRM Global HR Conference. So that's coming up September 14th. In case anyone's interested, you can DM me or email me afterwards, but it's a one-day conference, all global. So just had to put that in there for everyone. I'm going to go ahead and move to our next panelist, and I'm very thankful for both of these people joining me today and sharing their expertise with you. So I'll go ahead and have Daniel introduce himself, please.
Hi, Meredith. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a panelist today and for hosting this session. I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer based in Toronto, Canada. My law firm practices both Canadian and US immigration. We assist professionals, entrepreneurs, and companies with obtaining temporary work permits and permanent residency for both Canada and the United States. We work with employers of records, global expansion, with helping them and their clients with obtaining temporary work authorizations for Canada. And I'm excited to talk about the global talent stream and the global talent focus that we have today. And again, thank you very much, Meredith, for hosting this. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us. Y'all, it is going to be a spicy conversation today. All right, so next up, Francisco, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Awesome, thanks, Meredith. Yeah, so I'm Francisco Solis. I'm VMware Senior Manager of Global Immigration. So I manage a team of 11 people who manage global immigration for VMware. So I've been with VMware for about 4 years and have 15 years of experience in immigration. So and we also use GX in EMEA for a few of our projects.
Great. Thank you so much, Francisco, for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. I know that that's going to be very welcomed. If you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so here's really what we're going to be covering today. So I thought I'd walk through that with you. Obviously, we've done our welcome and introductions, but I'm going to be sharing some key stats, really talking about what we're looking at on the H-1B visa program. Francisco is going to be sharing information from his corporate experience and what he's experiencing himself, what his employees are going through, and what his company is dealing with. Then we're going to get some information from Daniel. Daniel's going to talk a lot about, what this program looks like, the Global Talent Stream for Canada, and what it means for you as companies and organizations and your employees. And then we're going to walk through, okay, we've talked about this broader piece, but now we're going to walk through, how does this work? And how is this going to solve issues for your organizations? Because it doesn't matter what size your company is, there are programs and solutions available. So we're going to share that information with you. Now we are going to do Q&A. We're going to leave about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A towards the end. So if you can, please put your questions in the Q&A box. Again, our chat is disabled, so if you just joined this, please don't use the chat function, but please use the Q&A, and then we'll address those. And if we don't get through all the questions on this call, please know that we will put the questions out and we will send them to everybody with answers, whether it's from Daniel's perspective, Francisco's, or from Global Expansion or my expertise. So if you can go ahead, Jake, to the next slide, please. All right. So let's talk about this, because obviously there's many of you on this call today that you live this every day, and it's not every day, it's year after year after year. We know that there's only 85,000 spots available in the H-1B lottery, period. And of that 85,000 spots, 20,000 of those spots are allocated to a master's cap. But I'm going to let Francisco talk about that because he walks that every day. So what does that mean for you as organizations? Well, I will tell you, as we were sitting on the call last Friday going through logistics, and I will tell it, honestly, guys, this isn't like super like planned out. So, but we know what we're talking about. But as we're sitting there, Francisco's like, hey, that number of 500,000 people registered is wrong. I just got the new number. So this year, 758,994 professionals have registered for the H-1B. There's only 85,000 spots available. 85,000. So what does that mean? There is now like over 673,000 plus people who will not get their renewal, who will not make the H-1B process. And now companies are scrambling to find out what to do with this talent. And that is what we're here to talk about today, is some solutions to support you. But on average, that percentage on the selection rate has continued to drop year over year. And right now, where we're seeing the average falling is about a 15% average selection rate on your H-1Bs. That's a pain point. It's a critical issue. And then you have this talent that your companies has worked so hard to bring on, certain special skill sets, that now you're trying to struggle and find solutions of where you're going to put these individuals. You don't want to have to re-recruit for these positions. And then there's the distress on the employee piece of it. So I kind of sound like the Debbie Downer kicking this off, but it's the reality of what I know each of you are dealing with on a daily basis, and what companies are looking, and some of their strategies on how they're going to retain these individuals, and especially if it's very special skill sets. So that kind of sets the stage of where we're walking through for this. So now what I want to do is, if we'll go ahead and switch the slide, please. I want to go ahead and turn this over to Francisco, because Francisco really, from a corporate perspective, he's got some valuable insights because he does this every day. So I'm super excited he's able to share his side with you and talk through some of these scenarios. So Francisco, I'm going to go ahead and let you take the spotlight.
Awesome. Thanks, Meredith. So just adding to your stats on the selection rate, we as a company, VMware has enjoyed a 40 to 50% selection rate year over year, just like many other employers in the past. So the selection rate this year was impacted by such an unprecedented number of registrations, which, as you mentioned, dropped the average selection rate across the board, right? So I'm okay to share that where we generally enjoyed the 40 to 50%, we went down to 20% selection rate. Slightly under 20% selection rate, which is a huge impact to our program. From what that means from the corporate perspective is the lower selection rate is really costing us is causing an increase of what we call internally the last chance employee, which is the employee population who goes unselected from the CAP to only have 1 year to remain in the States, right? So we partner with these last chance employees a year to 2 years in advance, so we can have a plan going forward if they're not selected. So this population essentially, where in the past we would see maybe 20 last chance employees that were not selected. And then of those 20, we were maybe having to relocate 10 or so employees because it was their last chance and they just didn't win the lottery. Now this year, because of the low selection rate, we're having to relocate closer to 30 employees. That's 30, beyond the employee population is 30 families, right? Is employees plus their spouse plus the dependents that they're having this uncertainty in the country that they want to have, so that they want to live permanently. And now we have to find them because of the selection rate. We have to find them a new home. So that's just one of the aspects that we as a company we try to look for. The stress on the employee, the uncertainty, right? Because as everybody wants to be certain where they stand in the country where they choose to live in. And for many of these employees, the U.S. is a long-term solution for them. So again, so just looking at solutions for this population is, what we take a look at is time zone. What time zone do they want to work in? Do they have a team in the country that they want to reside? And ultimately, because the U.S. is the country that they want to live in, Canada is obviously a popular choice. So because Canada is a popular choice, and we do have an entity in Canada, we do have the benefit of applying for an ICT, an intercompany transfer visa. But even with having an entity there, there's a critical aspect of getting the visa process timely before the U.S. Status expires. So even with having that entity there, we're running up to a really short timeline to get this visa issued. So, again, since we do have the benefit of we enjoy the ICT, we also have to look at alternatives that may expedite the process for us. That's where the global talent stream visa comes into play. We try to leverage that visa as much as we can, and because we have a properly structured entity, we have those two options to explore. But if you don't have an entity in Canada, or if your registration is not properly set up, that's where an EOR plays a big role, right? That's where GX plays a role, and then that's where an immigration professional in Canada like Daniel comes into play. And so that's going to be my handoff to Daniel, which to kind of go through those immigration options.
Perfect. Thank you, Francisco. I mean, I know, Francisco, you were telling us some stories when we were on the phone, and I was blown away. I was shocked. I was like, wow, okay, you have this individual, and then once they lose their H-1B, if that doesn't get renewed, is it right and correct me saying, Francisco, they have 60 days to find a solution?
Right. So if they are on a student visa on an F1 and they're not selected for the CAP, and they're down to, this is their last chance to obtain the CAP, then they have 60 days to find another employer, or another solution, whether it be an extension of the student visa, or they have to relocate to another country.
Right. And then from your organization's perspective, and I know we were kind of talking about this, and sorry, and then I promise, Daniel, we are going to get to you, but, Canada is a great option. And that's what Daniel's going to talk a little bit more about. But then, we want to make sure that we keep this a little bit expansive as well, because there are other areas of the globe where companies can park their employees if it makes sense. And from your perspective, Francisco, you were sharing a little bit of that with me, but, can you share from your perspective how that works within your organization and why you make those decisions?
Yeah, so we take a look at what the ease of the process, right? Again, timing is critical here for this population. So we take a look at countries where we have an entity, or where we may have a team that supports a client in that region. They're very, for our organization, Ireland and Spain are two countries that we that we leverage heavily. Ireland has a program similar to Canada that favors tech employees. So they have a critical skills list that they publish out, and typically we're able to leverage that a visa under that category, and we can get someone in country in Ireland in as little as 3 weeks. So if they meet the criteria, right, there's a salary threshold that they have to meet criticality of the role. But so we look at globally what countries can we expeditiously process a visa. So Spain, Canada, surprisingly the UK, because we're in very good standing with the UK, we're able to leverage the gold service, and so therefore we can expeditiously process a visa. UK is very expensive though compared to every other country, whereas in Canada Canada and Ireland we can probably move someone for as little as $10,000. You're looking at a visa in the UK at minimum at 25,000. That's not even inclusive of relocation costs. So, but yeah, there are many other avenues where you can explore, and again, if you don't have an entity in those countries, that's where GX will come into play, and to leverage the resource and their connections in those regions.
Perfect. And I know I'm going to ask you one more question, Francisco, because I thought it was really interesting. And y'all, I'm doing this all on the fly. Like, he did not have these questions in advance. So just so you know, he's really kind of being put on the spot. But one of the things that, you shared with me is that, when you get that cutoff and okay, these specific employees, oh my gosh, they didn't make it. What does that process look like internally from you? And are there any, tactics that you can share with individuals that have joined the call today to help them maneuver through this, like how they can be proactive in this process to retain this talent? So can you share any
Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on.
Best practices?
Yeah, be proactive. We start 8 months, 10 months in advance. As soon as the cap season for 2022 happened, we run a report of all of our expiration dates of whose visas are going to expire for the next year, so anything after 2023, we take a look at how many are going to expire. So if they make it onto our last chance report, we'll start working with the managers and the employees in identifying different countries that they have a population, an entity where they have a business unit or a client. And so again, all of it is about timing. 10 months, 8 months in advance, and have a plan A and plan B. Plan A would obviously be they get selected, and you can get them off your last chance report. Plan B would be what is the fastest and most efficient way to move them to a country that benefits both the company and the employee. And lastly, if sometimes we have to look at it where it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the company, but it will do a ease of mind for the employee. Take a look at where we can move in quickly, and then there's always that other strategy that to kind of calm the employee is, we will place you in this other country only for a year. If you ultimately want to come back to the U.S., we'll place you there for a year. Then we'll file an L-1B visa for you, or L-1A, whichever one you qualify for, and we'll get you back into the U.S. under that L visa, and then we'll go give it another crack to the to the H, and you'll have another a refresh amount of attempts for the H. So there's always strategy, right? You have to look at it full cycle, and I think you have to keep the employee in mind, but also the strategy in mind. Okay, Daniel's going to touch on a few things in Canada, right? You may run into you may have an employee that will see a benefit of going into Canada and realizing Canada has a really easy immigration process, and they can and Daniel will touch on this, they can get citizenship and permanent residency much quicker than in the US. So they may decide, what, I'm going to go to Canada and I'm going to stay in Canada. That's going to be my route. So it's just keeping everything in mind, and it just the only advice would be start very early and have an open and transparent conversation with your employees and your manager base.
Great tidbits. Thank you so much, Francisco. You know, I'm probably going to tap on you a couple more times, but we're going to go ahead and move forward. So let's talk about this. Now we know that there are solutions available. You know, obviously there are larger companies that have footprints where they're able to move their people underneath different entities, but then there's some companies that don't have that availability to go out and just like park people all over the world. And it may not make sense strategically. So let's go ahead and focus. We're going to talk about, let's go ahead and kind of drill down on the Global Talent Stream program in Canada. Jake, can you switch to the next slide, please? All right. So let's talk about this, because one that we started out with this, but we did know we wanted to share kind of a broader, bigger view with everyone on the call and not stay so relished and focused on a singular area. But now let's talk about Canada, because I think that this is an extremely unique program that's available to companies, and you don't have to have an entity in Canada. So we're talking about the Global Talent Stream program and parking your H-1B folks and not losing that talent in Canada. And Daniel's going to talk more about it. But we put some sample titles about, you know, different folks that will qualify for this program. Dana's going to walk you through that. But many of these different, you know, titles within your organization or specialties, you know, they're able to take advantage of this program. Now, again, you have to qualify for the program. So that's a key differentiator. And we're going to be speaking through that. We're going to walk you through the process. But I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Daniel so he can talk more about what that looks like for you as an organization and for your employees, and why many companies choose Canada over many other locations throughout the globe. Even though I know everybody, our employees think they can have a work from anywhere type attitude and they want to go to Costa Rica or Bermuda, but you know, it may not make sense. So let's talk about Canada, because it's a really nice area. Daniel, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you, and I'm going to let you take the wheel and drive.
Thank you so much, Meredith. I really appreciate you setting the stage. And Francisco, there's so much that you spoke about that I felt like I wanted to jump in and add to and expand on and engage in a dialogue, and I'm hoping for that opportunity a little bit later. But let's just take a step back for a second and just clarify exactly who we're talking about and who we're talking to. And I think it's really important, and I don't want to pick on VMware or any other large companies, but we are generally speaking today talking about using an EOR global expansion to move employees to Canada for companies that don't have a presence, a legal presence already in Canada, like VMware and other multinational companies that might have that. And so the Global Talent Stream is the program that levels the playing field between big companies or companies that have a cross-border presence and those that don't, because you can rely on an EOR global expansion to obtain a temporary work visa for those employees who are in the United States who didn't get their H-1B lottery selections. Obviously, it requires the ability for that employee to work remotely. They have to be able to engage with your organization to be able to do that. So somebody who is going into an office every day needs to be on a client site in the United States every day. That employee may not be the right fit for this program. They have to be able to work with a global team remotely. So what this also enables companies to do is to better make, I guess, sort of plan their human resource decisions, gives them labor force certainty. When you're talking about a 15% average selection rate, I don't know how a company can, properly plan in that environment. You're planning to lose way more often than you're planning to win. And so this gives a company an opportunity to really make decisions that will benefit their business operations. So how does this all work? Let's remember why companies in the United States and individuals are attracted to working in the United States. Great US universities producing amazing global talent. We have international students coming to the United States, studying at top universities, gaining great education. And then they have a term after their education for optional practical training, it's called, post-graduation employment. And they've landed an amazing job with one of the companies here that is attending this webinar. But they have a limit to the amount of time that they can work on that optional practical training. And so a company has to rely on the H-1B visa program, the H-1B visa system, which is a lottery-based system to secure that person a work authorization beyond the term of their optional practical training. And now we know you have about a 15% lottery chance of getting that selection. So from the individual's perspective, it's a very high risk proposition. And from the company's perspective, it's a very high risk proposition. But why are companies engaging this? The reality is there are hundreds of thousands of unfilled tech positions in the US that the existing labor pool cannot possibly meet. And individuals from all over the world are attracted to the United States. We just have to accept the reality that there's a very, very restrictive program. Moreover, one of the larger source countries of international students, particularly for professionals who work remotely and in tech and business savvy occupations, tends to be India. And we have a weighted lottery system that we can talk about this a little bit later, but on the permanent residency side, with a cap that affects how many of those nationals can be admitted for permanent residency in the United States every year. Okay, so we have one part of the picture here, which is the H-1B lottery selection system, 15% chance of getting selected. But then even if you are selected, right, if you're from Indian origin, you have an Indian passport, and you're now working for a US company, and you're on an H-1B visa, and you're looking to make that transition from a temporary work authorization to something more permanent, under a category called EB2, you may be familiar with, or EB3, there's a huge backlog. And you could be waiting 15 years, 20 years to get your US green card. Let's compare that to Canada and what Canada offers. And I think when I talk through this, I don't want to just focus on the person who wasn't able to get the H-1B lottery selection. Even those candidates who got the H-1B lottery selection and are now waiting for 15, 20 years for a green card, you're going to be shocked to hear how Canada's system really is different than the US and how great it is. First of all, there's no lottery, there's no cap, and there's no quota. Canada emphasizes openness and speed, and employers of records like Global Expansion can file work permit applications on behalf of employees that are coming to Canada to work for them. It's open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Francisco was talking about H-1B being a season, right? March, everyone's racing to register. April, end of March, beginning of April, we find out the results. October, the workers are coming, and then it starts all over again. In Canada, any time of the year, you can apply. So fast, it's reliable, it's available to tech and business savvy positions. The initial term of the work permit for Canada can be 3 years. It's renewable. The application processing times are quite quick. The government has a target to process applications for the initial position approval, what we call the Global Talent Stream LMIA. It's a long acronym, I don't want to have to get into it, but basically it's an approval of the position and the company for the role. And the target is 2 weeks. We're not actually seeing 2 weeks these days. COVID created a backlog. Recently ended a federal public services union strike in Canada. Typically, we're seeing about 2 weeks to get the position approval, and then about 10 weeks to get the working visa for an individual. That's still not that bad. And this goes back to Francisco's point about planning in advance, right? You at VMware, Francisco, said that you were looking at a candidate 8 to 10 months in advance, right? So if a company here who is thinking of using global expansion and looking at this as a solution to take your employees and park them in Canada, if you only really start exploring the solution after an employee has not been selected for the H-1B visa and they're coming up on an expire of their F-1 OPT, probably sometime in June, then they have that 60-day grace period. Now is the time to engage with global expansion based on these timelines, right? 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, things are going to get really tight. You're already into a situation where your employee may have to stop working for a little bit, but Canada is going to try to expedite that visa as fast as they can, given the current circumstances. The employee can be placed to work in any time zone, anywhere in Canada where global expansion has a presence, which is wonderful. So Toronto to Vancouver, Halifax, Alberta, Calgary, Alberta, I've had clients oddly go to Whitehorse. That was a one-off, but most of the time it's Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Montreal. But there are opportunities for people to move, to a different city, different place in Canada, to work remotely in the right time zone that fits for them and their company. Those candidates, we typically also assess them for permanent residency. And here's the real hook, in my view. For the US, if you're an Indian national and your company was successful in getting you an H-1B and they've gone to the next step and they're supporting you for permanent residency now, and you're looking at 15 years, right? Let's talk about what Canada, to have you, your family secure in Canada could be as fast as 6 months through the express entry permanent residency system. 6 months from the time that you express your interest in wanting to stay permanently in Canada to the time that you're a permanent resident. Now that requires you being selected. It is a by invitation only selection system for permanent residency. Having an employee in Canada, that employee on a global talent work permit will help with making that candidate more competitive. Right? So we now have a tie-in between these two different systems, the temporary work permit for 3 years where you've taken an employee and parked them in Canada, and permanent residency. That person who has a job offer to work in Canada on a continued basis beyond their permanent residency, in many cases that could be indefinite, but let's say for a 2 or 3 year term, right? That employee is going to benefit from something called arranged employment. And that employee will stand out from the crowd of other foreign skilled workers who may be applying, who don't have that arranged employment in Canada. So the job offer and the employment with global expansion will actually make that candidate more competitive against other candidates who are simply seeking to apply for permanent residency from outside of Canada without the benefit of having an employer of record here in Canada. So failing a person becoming competitive upon obtaining that work visa, another thing can make them more competitive, which is actually working in Canada for a year, gaining Canadian work experience, which would count. They're working in Canada, their employer of record is global expansion, they have a Canadian entity here that's legally employing them, right? That's Canadian work experience, right? That's perfectly fine. The relationship that the employer of record establishes with the US company is typically one of a service relationship, but the person is in Canada, they're filing their taxes in Canada, they're getting paid in Canadian dollars, it's Canadian employment, it can count for the Canadian experience class, Canadian work experience, making them even more competitive for the express entry system. And then typically the timelines to obtain Canadian citizenship, right? To get a Canadian passport, you're looking at about 3 years. 3 years is the minimum residency requirement. The person has to physically be present in Canada. They'll have some credit for any time they spend in Canada as a temporary worker, but to then get citizenship in 3 years from the time they become a permanent resident, in the length of time it takes to process a citizenship application. Usually we're looking at a total time frame from the time a client is introduced to us to the time they have their Canadian passport, about 5 years, right? Now that sounds like a long-term commitment, but it's important to note a few things about that commitment and what it means to you and your company. One, it's giving you a lot of certainty of your labor force, right? So it's great for business certainty. It's great for planning. You've also rewarded some employees, and Francisco, you can probably speak to this heavily. Like, you know, the employee who was there 15-year wait on a US visa versus the employee who has the Canadian citizenship now, they have that certainty that their investment to study in the United States, to spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on an education, has now earned them something than they may have otherwise not earned. It gives you as a company a competitive advantage over anybody else who isn't using this program, right? Let's be honest. How many people know about this? Every time I speak to a US company through an EOR like Global Expansion, I'm here, wow, I wish we knew about this before. You mean to tell me you've taken my lottery odds of 15%, 20% and turned them into labor force certainty, rewarding our top global talented employees, the employees, the retention rate looks great because they feel that they have an employer that respects them and wants to keep them, understands their family situation. And so the client, both the company and the individual worker, tend to be quite happy. And then the contrast of not using something like this, maybe Francisco, you can talk about this a little bit more, is the replacement cost of losing that employee, right? First of all, it's probably a huge morale killer, right? You have a person who is integral to your team, and suddenly that person would have to leave. They didn't get their lottery spot, or they have to go and spend money, as you have said, Francisco, enroll in another post-secondary program to continue in student status and work in what we call CPT and then OPT status again. But the replacement cost of losing that employee, if that isn't an option and they have to go home overseas, recruiter costs, team morale, productivity, there's huge losses. And I can't imagine that that's going to be less expensive, both from a financial cost perspective to a more morale perspective, than taking that worker, moving them to Canada, and giving them the opportunity to be here. So speed, reliability, certainty, these are all the features of the Canadian system. And hopefully now with the strike resolved and as we get farther and farther from COVID, hopefully things will pick up and we'll get back to that 2-week window of processing. So that way even the people who come onto this program a little bit late to the game won't be burned by it, and we'll be able to bring the people to Canada.
Yeah, I would agree, Daniel. I think the cost of replacement is high. It's not just financially, but the equity of experience that individual has gained with your company, right? The ramp up to get someone to replace that talent and to gain all that equity that employee might have already placed here for 5, 6, 8, 10 years. That's a big loss. That's a big loss to try to replace someone with that much equity in your program, right. Especially in the tech space, right? If we don't retain that talent, it is going to go to a competitor, and that is a lot of investment that we've made for that employee.
That's right, and a lot of Canadian companies are looking to school up people in that situation, right? We have to be realistic. If a person is going to be looking for alternatives and they've just invested all that time, effort, and energy in developing their skills, and now they've been with a company for 2-3 years, right? In some tech spaces, that's quite senior. I mean, there's not even technologies that have been around for that long, and that person's become an expert. They're a hot commodity, right? And so Canadian companies are aware of that, or other companies that are in the United States or who are using employers of record are going to be aware of that as well, and they're going to try to bring that person to Canada to have a great, well-paying job as a leading senior, whatever it may be, software engineer, developer, machine learning scientist, yeah.
Those are both very relevant points. And that was something that we actually had talked about, because it is a cost that I know companies are aware of, but really understanding it's not just the cost to replace the labor, but then, to find the talent. Then you have the days or, that recruitment piece. And then there's just overall, it's like a huge investment. I think I heard a number, and I'm not saying this is accurate, but somewhere between, and this is probably low, 50 to 75,000 just to replace like one position. So if you figure like, as Francisco gave an example, I mean, you're talking like 30 people that you could potentially lose if you didn't have some type of plan in advance or structure or conversations with your employees. That's a huge hit. And then you're talking about the soft costs, like the loss of knowledge. You're talking about, all of the training. What projects were they working on? So I feel like, being able to drive this home and you guys sharing this information with those that are on this call today, all of this is relevant as organizations are looking at that broader picture. So thank you, Daniel, for bringing that up. And thank you, Francisco, for chiming in. I know we've got a few minutes left to kind of go through a little bit more information because we did want to leave room for Q&A. So let's talk about what does this process look like? That's where we went ahead. So Jake, can you go ahead and switch to the next slide, please? I try to make this as simplistic as possible, because this is the reality of how the process works. And even though it's a complicated process, we did put it on a grid to make it fine, a little bit simple for you. So basically we talked about that, and Daniel just talked about it as well. And I'm going to tap on Daniel and Francisco for you guys to kind of walk through some pieces. But the process is as simplistic as it can be. First off, your candidate has to qualify. That candidate has to meet with a Canadian immigration lawyer to make sure that your employee, your H-1B person, will qualify for the Global Talent Stream program. That's number one step, because there's no reason to go ahead and follow the rest of the steps if they're not going to qualify. Once that's been determined and they're able to qualify for this specific program, then we have to put an employment contract in place. Now we're talking from an employer of record service. So I want to talk about this on, kind of a broader level as well, and just pause on this piece, because it was really interesting to me that Daniel had brought this up on the call. He said, and he actually said it. He said, bigger companies, they can do this, all day long because they have their entities set up, but it levels the playing field. Now this gives startups, smaller companies, mid-sized companies, it gives you a solution and an option to be able to take relevant talent and have another solution that wasn't there before. So it levels that playing field so that just the big players aren't, able to say, oh, we can take you. And then you're losing that critical talent or talent that you may be looking to secure. So once we have the employment contract signed and all of that is executed, then at that point, that process can start with a Canadian immigration lawyer in order to get the visas. And Daniel, is that correct? That's probably, well, of course, you guys probably just heard it, but hot off the press, there is a strike happening with
it's resolved now, thankfully.
Workers. Oh, is it resolved? Okay.
Yeah.
Update. Quick update, newsflash, it's resolved.
we're breaking news. No, they
news.
did just resolve it a couple of days ago. Thankfully, I think it went on for a total of 12 days. I'm not sure how it's going to impact service standards and processing. And to be honest, I did see applications continuing to get processed during the strike, but we really, I don't think we really know the impact yet. But they're going to work as fast as they can to minimize that impact.
Perfect. So about 90 days, right?
From the time that a person is initially introduced, where we have to do the initial assessment, then they go to negotiate an EOR contract. I think 90 days is certainly comfortable, right? 10 to 12 weeks when we're talking about needing a visa. There may be employees who are visa exempt, who don't require one, or the ones that we really love. They have a visa for Canada already. Their US visa is still valid. There's actually something we may be able to do to bring them to Canada even quicker. And we have a strategy where we can bring them to Canada on a temporary 30-day authorization while that initial position approval is being processed. But they need that visa first, that visitor visa first, to make that happen. And then while they're in Canada waiting for that 2 to 3 week position approval, once it gets approved, we can do something called flag polling, which is an immigration solution where a person drives to the Canada-US border, turns around at the flagpole, comes back into Canada. And previously they couldn't do that because they required a visa. Now they can because they were in Canada, went to the US and came back, and they can get their 3-year work permit on the spot. So planning in advance, you may not necessarily be thinking about applying for a work visa right away for an employee. But if you have an employee and you can get them, and they have already, or they can get a visitor visa, we can sort of short circuit that 10, 12-week processing time through various strategies. And, usually in year one, when we first start working with a company and they're hearing about that, they may not be positioned for that when they're new to the program. But certainly companies that are well-established, who've used this before in the past, and they're going through the H-1B lottery system year after year, they're already identifying their place. Hey, why don't you go apply for a Canadian visa, 6 months in advance as a visitor, you go there, maybe even, explore, see, well, there's a good reason for that. And it really gives them an opportunity to to not have to worry about losing a paycheck while they're in that 60-day grace period and they can't work. What's the saying? Or the early bird catches the worm, right? So
Good one.
be early. You're not going to be harmed by being early, right?
Right. Exactly. Well, thanks for sharing that, Daniel. So then employee gets that, everything's put in place, they're into Canada. And then at that point, that employee, once they're there, they can start looking at applying for permanent residency, which on average, I think is running about 16 plus months, depending on the specific situation. And, if you're using an employer of record service, obviously we're managing this process for you as an organization, even though we're acting as an extension of your HR, your payroll, your compliance, we're mitigating that risk for permanent establishment, but your employees being supported that whole way through the process. And I think that that's important to know, that even though we're that legal vehicle to get your person where they need to be, you're still managing their day-to-day. They're still your employee. It's a co-employment type arrangement. And, it's one that's giving that flexibility in multiple different ways. So that's the process. We're going to go ahead because we've got just about, looks like about, maybe 9 minutes left. And I did want to leave room for questions. So hopefully the audience isn't going to make it easy on us. I'm waiting for that Q&A box to really start flying, and, you guys are going to hammer us. I'd like to see some hard questions come in for Francisco and Daniel. So, because this is about sharing information. So I'll pause for just a second and see if there's any questions.
Hey, Daniel, I answered one that I was actually addressed to you.
Yeah, I saw that. No problem. The fact that Australian nationals are not retrogressed. Yeah, absolutely right. So Australians wouldn't be subject to that, the same backlog. But there's still a process. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but going through the process after someone has an H-1B, getting a perm, and then beyond that, it may not strategically be advisable in year one to file the H-1B. We sometimes recommend to our clients, wait 2-3 years, maybe when you're doing that H-1B extension to do it. But I think if the question here from Euclitan is how fast can you do it? In theory, you can do it pretty fast, 3-4 years. I've even seen quicker than 3.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, you may be able, why you can get it done quicker, and what we mean about being retrogress is if a specific country is not retrogress, then you can concurrently file your I-140 and your 485, meaning you're essentially a step or two ahead of from someone who potentially has to wait for their visa number to be available. So it is a strategy that you can use if you're not retrogress. Additionally, where the time consuming is going to be is the Department of Labor. That's the prevailing wage and Department of Labor approval. That's at the current was taking, I think, eight months alone with that. Depending on what position that individual is filling, your recruitment may or may not take a little bit longer than usual. That's what we're currently experiencing ourselves because of all of the tech layoffs. There's a lot of interested employees. There's a lot of resumes that our TA group has to review. So therefore, our recruitment process extends a little bit beyond the normal 35 days. So, but yeah. So, anyways, thank you for elaborating there, Daniel.
I would also want to add one more thing, just while we're waiting for some questions to come in. Since we're on the topic of an Australian national and we're comparing the U.S. and Canadian system, that Australian employee may not actually need an H-1B. There may be a different visa that's available to them. But from the perspective of Canada, Canada is part of a trade agreement. There's a long-winded name to it. I shorten it to TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. That Australian citizen who would need a work visa for Canada could actually fly in and apply for it at a port of entry without needing a position approval through the global talent stream in advance. They rely on that international trade agreement, call them international free trade professionals. And it's an amazing solution because that Australian national, even if you just found them and you wanted to hire them, you can bring them to Canada literally tomorrow. They're visa exempt. They can get on an airplane, fly at the airport, get a work permit, and immediately be on a pathway to permanent residency. just to compare and contrast, the systems, how fast Canada's system is and how reliable it is.
That's super interesting. All right. There was something, Francisco, and you actually brought it up earlier in the call. So I'm going to go ahead and ask this question because it was raised, but it's something that's really interesting. We did talk about, companies that have established entities in Canada. Now, you may have an established entity, but it may not be in good standing, or it may not be set up properly. And that can be anywhere globally. Can Francisco or Daniel, can you talk about what that means when somebody's like, oh, my company has an entity set up in Canada, we think it's in good standing, we might be able to bring these people in, but what does that mean from a definition standpoint? Like, what is good standing for a corporation who has an entity set up in Canada? What does that mean for them?
Right. Francisco, do you mind if I take it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So we have to establish between the U.S. entity or a global entity and the Canadian entity something called a qualifying relationship. What that means is that the entities are under common ownership, direction, and control, either by a common parent or by a group of individuals who own the companies in roughly the same proportions, or alternatively, let's say the U.S. or global entity owns the Canadian entity. That will create the conditions for which a company can transfer intracorporately an employee from the United States over to Canada. So we need to have that qualifying corporate relationship. Sometimes what we have is companies that are established in Canada, and quite intentionally to shield the parent company from further liability of being a direct subsidiary, what they'll do is they'll establish the entity in Canada and not have a qualifying corporate relationship from an immigration perspective. Those companies won't necessarily be able to execute an intra-company transfer. And the second side of it is, well, what happens if that company is as a startup, or maybe they don't have the most attractive financial record for their Canadian entity, and they want to look at the global talent stream to support an employee, right? They may not necessarily be able to do that. They may have to look towards an established employer of record that does have good financial records. But there's something about the global talent stream here that I think we've missed, and it probably should be stated. The global talent stream, in order to support these positions, a company in Canada has to have what's called a labor market benefits plan. They have to convince the government of Canada that bringing in this tech professional is going to lead to certain benefits. Generally speaking, the most obvious benefit is the hiring of other Canadian citizens and permanent residents. So a company that has a very small team and isn't necessarily in a position to hire other Canadians and can't commit to hiring other Canadians, they may not necessarily qualify as a company for the global talent stream. They may have great books, excellent books and records. They may have established an entity here the right way, and it could be a well-run organization, but they're just not in a hiring mode to hire Canadians. The source of their talent and their labor may be outside of Canada, or they just don't have the need right now, or they can't find the talent in Canada. They're looking globally. So an employer of record who is kind of pooling in different clients from all over, right? They are hiring not only foreign nationals and parking them in Canada, they are quite often acting as an employer of record and hiring Canadian citizens, right? And those Canadian citizens are working remotely for US companies. Well, guess what? That hiring counts as part of their meeting their commitments to the government when they negotiate these labor market benefits plans. And so you kind of get to leverage the experience and size of a larger employer of record in that way, that you may not necessarily be able to do if you're a small company in Canada.
Thank you for answering that question. We've had some more questions come in, and I want to make sure that we keep it on time, but there was a question that came in from someone in our audience, so thank you guys. They asked if there's a need to recruit and hire employees in South American countries, does global expansion help in those areas? So I'm going to answer that. If you guys don't mind, I'm just going to answer that two-part, and then we're going to try to get to the other two before we shut this party down. But basically, we can help you employ those people in South American countries. And yes, we can help get you a direct connection to recruit and hire. Now, I don't know if you're talking about local nationals, which that's what it sounds like. But yes, we have resources. And basically what we'll do is we will direct connect you with somebody that can help you recruit those specific. Then once you've chosen those employees, we can onboard them. So we'll do the hiring process, but they're your people and we want you to be able to choose those people. And at that point, then yes, we can onboard them and we can manage them and we can be that, compliant and legal vehicle that can help you employ these people in these different areas. And quite honestly, we're seeing a lot of companies doing that where they're looking at different countries for talent in order, because they just can't find it here. So they're able to go into Costa Rica or El Salvador, and they're able to find these specific individuals. And even though they don't have an entity, we can allow them that opportunity to be able to get that talent, have it be their talent, bring them on board, payroll them, pay any of the social burdens and taxes. We counsel the organization and we help work you through that process. So, all right, perfect. All right. And then we've got a few more minutes. So, all right. Euclid asked another question. Hi, Meredith, like how global expansion can help in Canada as well. Oh yeah, you can contact me directly. So, let me put my email address in here and you're welcome to connect with me directly. And my contact details will come up at the end. And then there was another question up here, so I'll type it in. I'm not good at like multitasking, typing and talking, so sorry, everyone. But then also there was a question to Francisco, and hopefully everyone's welcome to hang on because we really love you being on and sticking with us through this spicy topic. Francisco, what is the employee's experience relocating to Canada? Their concerns and etc. And how is VMware supporting the transition, like with relocation benefits, etc. So,
no problem. Actually, Meredith, if you're okay, the question from Marty de Negro kind of applies to what Daniel was mentioning. So Daniel,
okay, perfect.
If you don't mind answering that one, it's
Sure.
about the global talent stream and just questions whether it's tied to an individual like an H-1B. That was to what you were talking about. Yeah.
It's a quick answer. It's tied to the individual like the H-1B. In other words, I think this person is asking, can I port that visa from employer to employer? Right. No. You're tied to the employer. So that worker and that employee are tied together in that relationship for the life of that permit. But there's nothing preventing, for example, a person who is in Canada already on a work permit for the global talent stream for your company to apply to change employers. There's a process for that. So you can apply to change employers in Canada. I hope that answers the question.
Cool. And then so Meredith, and then based on the question in regards to our employee experience, the actual experience is a positive one, right? Once we're able to map out the long-term solution or even short-term solution, the employees are very happy to move to Canada. I mean, that's why it's so popular. So in regards to relocation, we do have a specific package that we provide for individuals that we have to relocate due to being a last chance. So they do get the full benefits of having transportation, household goods, and all of those general benefits that a relocating employee would have. Obviously, some of them opt out of it because they know it's a short term and they probably already own a home in the U.S. So they really are looking at it as a short-term solution. So they'll opt out of it. But ultimately, that the benefits are very expensive, and that's why Canada is so popular, right? Because it's just what is it? Just a throw over the border, and you land in Canada. So especially for our population that lives up north, they're able to just it's not a huge move for them.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, guys, we're at time. I promised to keep you guys on time, on task today. So again, Thank you, Francisco, and thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate you making time and being here with us today and sharing your knowledge and your experience. I did want to let the audience know we have recorded this session, so we will be sending it out. Feel free to watch it like a Netflix. If you just want to like binge watch us, we're like more than happy with that. Feel free to share it within your organization. We'll make sure that you get it. And please know that we actually have a white paper that has been written up on this whole piece that we've just spoken about, and you will be receiving that white paper. If you need additional information or you're wanting to get in touch with Daniel or Francisco, please feel free to email me. My email address is there, big on the screen, so you can see it. Feel free to link in with me. You can send me a message through LinkedIn. You can text me. You can email me. I'm happy to, help in any way that I can or direct connect you with Francisco or Daniel. So again, thank you everyone for your time today. We appreciate you joining us. I hope you've walked away with some key benefits and relevant information that will support you in your mission and endeavors and your strategies. Thanks again, and we are done.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Meredith. I really appreciate you hosting today.
Thank you so much.